Hey guys, Anders here with a video on the new class Drakania. We're going to take a look at her skills in Succession and give you my thoughts on the class as she is right now. I'm playing a pre-release build, so some skills may change when it goes live, so please keep that in mind. I'll of course update you guys on the channel with new videos of the changes. Now Drakania is basically an offensive powerhouse, high damage, good mobility, and some of the best utility in the game. To understand how she works, we first need to talk about Drakania's Succession trait, Markthanen's Might. This passive allows Drakania to stockpile more ions in your shard and use your ions instantly when activating certain skills. Ions are Drakania's unique resource. You can have up to 18 ions stockpiled at any given time, and you can tell how many ions you have by looking at your ion meter. Depending on your HUD of choice, your ion meter will look one of two ways. They both display the same information, though I think it's a bit important to note that the custom HP HUD is able to show when you have just one ion, while the newer HUD is not able to. Maybe this will get fixed in the future. It doesn't really matter. Feel free to use whichever HUD you like. I just thought I'd mention it. Now, ions affect 4 different skills in Drakania's skill set: Eviscerate, Blazing Strike, Brimbolt Strike, and Markthanen's Flourish. Now, each of these skills will have a normal version and an ion version. To activate the ion version of these skills, you need to have at least 3 ions saved up in your ion meter. When you use the ion version of the skill, you automatically consume those 3 ions. This ion cost can be negated if you want by charging up the skill, meaning you will get a cast bar and will activate the skill once you finish casting. This will allow you to do full damage without using ions at the cost of activation time. Consuming ions for these skills give you max damage and activate the skills instantly. The only skill you cannot charge to bypass that is also an ion skill is Blazing Strike. Now let's go over how do you even get ions in the first place. What is ion generation? Ions can be generated by using any of these skills. There are 5 different skills that generate a number of ions themselves. The first skill we'll go over is called Embers. Now Embers is a low cooldown unprotected ability that gives you 1 ion on hit. The number of enemies you hit does not change how many ions you get. So if you use Embers and hit 10 enemies, you still only get 1 ion. This is true for all ion generating skills, so please keep that in mind. The next skill is called Abyssal Fang. It's an unprotected ability that gives you 2 ions instead of 1. The third skill is Brimbolt Raise, a forward guard knockdown CC skill, also an AoE, and it generates 3 ions for you. This is the safest skill to use for generating ions, but although the tooltip mentions you just need to cast Brimbolt Raise, you still need to hit a target for you to actually get those ions. The fourth skill is Markthanen's Scale, a 40-second cooldown ability that generates up to 12 ions if you hold it for the full duration. As the skill can be cancelled, you can cast it and cancel it to receive part of that 12 ions should you wait for the entire ability animation to end. Lastly, the 5th skill to generate ions is your ebuff skill. Using this will fill your ion meter completely and prevent consumption of ions for the duration of the effect. This means you can activate your ebuff and use all of your ion skills at full power instantly for 30 seconds. The longest cooldown skill has a 12-second cooldown, so if you plan it right, you can cast that skill twice and the rest 3 times each in that window of time. This translates to some of the highest burst in the history of the game if you're able to land all skills on your target. So now that we know how ions work, let me explain why you even want to bother using the ion version of skills and how you should be thinking about where to spend your ion energy. To do so, we're going to have to do some quick math and look at how much damage each of the 4 ion skills do with and without ion energy. This allows us to see how much more damage we get for expending ion energy. Now remember, each ion skill costs the same amount of ion energy, so you really want to spend your ions on skills that give you the most damage increase. As we can see, Brimbolt Strike and Blazing Strike are the 2 skills that benefit the most from using their ion version. Brimbolt Strike does over 3 times the damage and Blazing Strike does over 2 times the normal damage. This means we want to make sure we utilize our ion generating skills and place them before the 2 ion consuming skills in whatever combo you want to craft in PvE or PvP. This will ensure you deal maximum damage in your combos. Hopefully I've made it clear how important the ion resource is to Drakania. It can mean the difference between feeling like Drakania is lackluster and being completely floored by how much damage she deals. Don't be surprised if you hear both opinions once she goes live. If someone isn't using her ion skills correctly, they don't realize just how much damage they're missing out on. Now let's move on to Drakania's full skill set so we can better understand the tools she she has to work with. The first skill we're going to take a look at is called Slayer Training. This is your basic normal attack skill, nothing really that special, though it does recover mana if you find yourself out of mana options. Next up, we have Skewer, a quick stabbing ability that gives you a 9% all accuracy buff that lasts 10 seconds. This skill itself is on a 4-second cooldown and doesn't need to hit a target to apply that buff, meaning you can and should always have this accuracy buff active. Skewer also has a flow skill called Breath Split that does a floating CC and has the same cooldown as Skewer. Both of these skills are spammable and can link up with other skills to speed up their animations. Skewer will be one of your most used skills in the kit and is one of the best abilities in your skill set. Next up, we have Omni Slash, an AoE ability with an evasion debuff that lasts longer than the cooldown of the skill. Although it is unprotected, it is well-rounded with only a drawback of being slow in the windup and having a stabbing animation. To get around this, you can use Skewer before using Omni Slash to skip the stabbing animation of Omni Slash and providing you with 2 quick skills that provide both accuracy buffs and evasion shred in a short amount of time. The next skill is Embers, a very low cooldown skill that is quick casting and gives you an all AP plus 20 buff for 10 seconds. Like Skewer, you don't need to hit a target to apply the buff. As I mentioned before, this skill also generates 1 ion. The only downside to this skill is the down smash effect, which can make using this skill early in a PvP combo a little awkward if the down smash activates. Azure Onslaught is one of your bread and butter engage abilities. You travel a good distance forward and are fully protected with a slight lingering super armor after you land a hit. You gain back mana on hit and have a knockdown CC that can also apply in PvP. With a low cooldown of 4 seconds, this skill is excellent and should be used as often as possible. Dragon's Maw is a good skill that sadly gets outshined by the rest of the kit. It has okay damage, a floating CC, and a down smash, but with a slow animation and longer than average cooldown, there are better skills to use in PvE. Mark Thanen's Breath is quite possibly my favorite skill in the entire kit. Though the tooltip describes the skill as a Dragon Breath attack summon, it does look like a Dragon Meteor dive bomb instead. It causes minus 20 DP debuff on hits. It has good AoE damage, good range, and a 50% accuracy modifier since it is treated as a summon attack. The only downside of this skill is the absolute lack of crit modifier. If you run max crit and use crit rate add-ons in skills before activating Breath, you will see the damage absolutely skyrocket. Though it is unprotected, you can use some skills to cancel the end animation. It's a great skill overall. Brimbolt Raise is another amazing skill in the kit. It has full regard, nice AoE, knockdown CC, and it generates 3 ions, meaning you can use any of your ion skills immediately after Raise. The only downside is the slow windup, but you can use some skills like Refraction, or I like to use Omni Slash since they flow so well and you skip the windup animation altogether. And I forgot to mention, Raise has a vacuum effect in PvE. Next up, we have our first ion skill, Blazing Strike. Blazing Strike is the only ion skill with no charging available, meaning the only way to do full damage is to have at least 3 ions. The normal damage of the skill is mediocre and the casting can be very slow. You want to always use one of the cancel skills before Blazing Strike to at least skip the wind-up animation. Luckily, there are many skills in the kit that allow you to skip the wind-up animation, and Blazing Strike is also a forward guard, so you should be safe when casting this in PvE and PvP. Once you do use your ions for the max damage, the AoE increases and the amount of damage you deal is unrivaled in Drakania's kit. If you use Blazing Strike's ion activation every time it is off cooldown, the skill will deal the most amount of damage per minute in the entire game. Mark Thanen's Flourish is your second ion ability. The normal cast of this skill is pretty good on its own and has decent AoE. This is also your 100% ability and it does decent damage with some spooky range. The only downside of the 100% is the slow cast, but the normal version of Flourish is quick and decent. You can charge it up for full damage if you want, but the damage added isn't really worth the extra time investment for the charge up. Eviscerate is your third ion ability and one of the more versatile ones. You can charge the skill to do full damage or instantly cast it by consuming ions. The upside of charging the skill is that you have a longer frontal guard while you charge up and then execute the skill. It lingers as well, which is nice. This skill will propel you forwards and allow you to cancel some slower animation skills that may be unprotected. The only downside I could find of this skill is the damage. When you use it with ions, it's not really worth the ions you consume if you can use it for other abilities like Brimbolt Strike and Blazing Strike. Now speaking of Brimbolt Strike, that's our last ion ability. It is also the strongest hitting skill in the game if you use the max damage version. It has good AoE and damage on normal cast, but the ion version is insane. The range gets larger, the damage triples, and guess what? It has a flow with no cooldown that basically duplicates Brimbolt Strike and shoots it forward. If that wasn't enough, it also has a vacuum in PvE. This skill is just simply amazing, your best skill in the whole kit. Weirdly enough, there is a combo where you can use Skewer into Breath Split into Brimbolt Strike by simply holding down R and B. It's a very quirky hidden combo they added for some reason. This is absolutely one of the skills you want to be using for your ion consumption for every single combo. The only downside I've really found is that the hitbox on the flow is a little finicky and doesn't always connect. Sometimes it just flies above the target, doesn't really hit anything, but hopefully that gets fixed. Next up, we have one of the most broken skills in the game until it eventually gets nerfed, called Markthanen's Scale. A 40-second cooldown skill that gives you a damage reduction rate of 50% for 5 seconds. The reduction effect refreshes until the end of the skill, which lasts about 10 seconds or so. That means once the skill ends, you will have around 4 seconds of reduction effect, which you can move around and use skills with. It also has a drain mana ability to anything around you. Drain mana is extremely potent against some classes and can be found in not just this skill, but many other skills in Drakania's kit. Markthanen's Scale is the most potent of those skills that can drain mana, and to understand why I call this skill the most broken in the game, we need to look at one of Drakania's passives, Dragonborn Constitution. This is an amazing name for a passive, by the way, but not only does it have an amazing name, its ability allows Drakania to cleanse any slow that has been placed on her. So if you're in Sakraya and have the tower put a debuff on you, you can use any one of your Succession skills to cleanse the debuff immediately. This effectively makes it impossible to slow down Drakania. That's not what makes it broken. There are 4 skills that will cleanse not only yourself, but also your allies. Your 3 Ion skills, Brimbolt Strike, Eviscerate, and Flourish, will all cleanse if you use the charging version of the skill. If you use the Ion version, you will not cleanse your allies, you will only cleanse yourself. If you use the normal version, you will not cleanse your allies either. You have to charge up the skills in order to cleanse those around you. The last skill that will allow cleansing for allies is Markthanen's Scale. While you're in PA with that reduction buff, for those 10 to 15 seconds, every ally around you is getting cleansed and every enemy around you is getting mana drained. The crazy thing is that when you use Markthanen's Scale, you do not get the typical PA debuff, meaning every 40 seconds you can be disruptive in any large fight. In PvE, the skill is also great simply for the ion generation it provides. If you hold it for the entire duration, you will gain back 12 ions, meaning you can use 4 ion abilities back to back for some serious burst damage. It's an amazing skill that I think has to be nerfed in some way because I've never seen anything like it in the history of the game. Now next up, we have Markthanen's Dominion, a very good large AoE ability with low cooldown, good damage. The only thing I don't like about this skill is the slow windup, which can be negated by using Flourish, for example, right before Dominion, and the ending animation is a little on the long side, so chaining other skills takes longer than you would like, honestly. Not the end of the world. The pushback of enemies in PvE is also not great. I would have liked it to be a vacuum, but overall, still a very hard-hitting skill. Nice AoE, very good in PvE. Next up, we have your E-buff, Dragon's Fury. This E-buff is very powerful if used correctly. You get 30 AP, 15% attack speed, and 15% accuracy rate, which means you would more or less have over 30% accuracy rate while this thing is active before any evasion debuff gets applied on your enemy. This alone will shred any evasion build. Although it's really good against evasion, the added effect is really what I like about this skill. As soon as you use it, you generate ions to the max. So if you were at 0 ions, you gain 18 ions. That is the max you can have at any given time. While this effect is lasting, those 30 seconds, all your ion skills do not consume ions, meaning you can use your ion skills 2 to 3 times at max damage with this E-buff. Then when it ends, you can use 6 more ion skills before you run out of ion energy. It's a very powerful E-buff to say the least. Very, very strong for Drakania. Next up, we have our Q block, Scales Bastion. It's a really cool name. Again, I like it. This is a forward guard Q block, so no SA, and you gain 20 DP for 20 seconds on use. Meaning, if you want to self-buff before any engagement, you use Embers, Skewer, and then Bastion to get 20 DP, 20 AP, and 9% accuracy rate buffs. That's not bad at all. Dragon Walk is your first dash. It is a super armor on a 3-second cooldown. You can dash laterally and backwards, but not forwards. It's not a bad skill with maybe the only downside being no forward movement and the distance is kind of short, although it's not too bad since we have the following dash, Refraction. Refraction is a 2-second dash with iframe. The distance is pretty good, and you can even link it with a super armor attack called Soaring Assault. You can only use Refraction laterally, but it follows your camera movement, so you can move forwards and around targets pretty easily. I really like this skill a lot. It feels really smooth and responsive. Refraction also allows you to use one of your 3 charging ion abilities and store them by using Refraction. Corsair Awakening had something very similar when she released before it was fixed, but this time the Refraction tooltip itself says you can use it like this, so maybe it is intended. The skill will pocket only if you dash mid-charge. It will then unleash after the dash at normal damage levels, not charge levels. Now, to unleash the max damage, you would need to consume ions after the dash. Abyssal Fang is the last of the ion generating abilities. It can only be used after any other skill and has incredibly short range, but generates 2 ions and drains some mana, so not a bad skill just for the ion generation. You absolutely want to use it at higher end grinding areas, and it also allows you to animation cancel some but not all skills. Next up, we have another movement ability called Dragon's Advance. Now this is a super armor movement skill that charges forward, almost like a lance charge. It's a little on the slow side, but it can flow into Markthainen's Wings, our next ability. This will dash you forward by pressing spacebar. It is a super armor skill. No super armor if you use it on cooldown, of course, and the stamina hit hurts if you spam it too much, but the nice thing is it lets you dash over objects and buildings. Elevation is basically no problem. Combine this with our next skill, Markthainen's Claws, and you're set. You can jump off pretty much anywhere and not deal with desync, at least in my testing. Markthainen's Claws is also a super armor attack, by the way, sort of like the Azure Onslaught. You can use it after advance or wings, and it's going to propel you forward even if you are in the middle of the air. The super armor on Claws lingers even after the landing as well. Very, very good. Now finally on to the passives for Drakania. The first passive is called Markthainen's Rattle. You gain 12 AP and 10% critical hit damage at max level. Really good for what Drakania wants, being offensive. Her Succession passive is called Cinders and gives her 140 HP and 5% accuracy rate. The accuracy rate alone is incredible as a passive. Bloodthirst I already explained. This is what lets you use your ions and generate ions through skills. They need to update the tooltip though, since there are a lot of mistakes there. And lastly, Markthainen's Heart is Drakania's last passive. This allows her to regenerate health once her HP drops below 50%. So if you use Flourish, Brimbolt Strike, or Eviscerate, you can regenerate up to 60% of your max HP. If you use Markthainen's Scale, while you're below 50% HP, you will regenerate up to 80% of your max HP. So this helps if you're using the skill in group PvP and getting bombarded with AoE damage. You won't die through the damage reduction buff. You'll heal yourself all the way up to 80%. And that's all of Drakania's skills. On paper, this class looks to be incredibly strong, but I should say she lacks in some areas. Defensively, she's nothing to write home about outside of the Markthainen scale, and she lacks any sort of slows herself to apply on enemies. So even though she can cleanse slows for herself, she can't really slow down her opponent outside of add-ons. I've had a lot of fun playing this class for this preview, and I can't wait to play Drakania when she goes live, even if there are some changes, which I assume will happen. The video is long enough though, so if you enjoyed the video, I'll have more uploads on Drakania in the channel shortly. PvE guide, PvP thoughts, and an infinite PvE combo video for you guys to check out. Let me know what you guys think about the class in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next one.